Hello and welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live. My lovely guest today is Kelli Thompson, and we released a podcast episode together it's over 2 weeks ago now that the podcast has actually come out, proving really, really popular. Kelli was a brilliant guest talking all about the confidence gap. So maybe, Kelli, that's where we start talking about. So today's LinkedIn Live is really just a flavour of some of the things that we spoke about. We'll be chatting together for about 10 minutes today, to give people top line overview of what we talked about on the full podcast episode. And if you haven't listened to the full episode, the link is below in the comments. So definitely check it out, or wherever you get your podcasts. Kelli, do you want to kind of do an intro to yourself and talk about, well, what actually is the confidence gap?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to talk to you again. I'm Kelli Thompson. I'm a women's leadership coach. I'm an author. My book, Closing the Confidence Gap, will be released on November 1st. And I do some speaking as well. So I've been running my own business since 2019. I was a corporate veteran and decided to go off on my own. And, I definitely have felt the confidence gap. I didn't have language for it when I was in corporate or early in my career, but let's just talk quickly about what it is. So some professors at Wharton Business School did a study. And they wanted to understand, is there some gender-based differences in confidence? Because it just seems like sometimes men have an easier way of speaking up and advocating for themselves. And so the long and the short of it is they gave individuals this standardized test. And they did not tell them how they did on the test. But what they asked them to do is they said, based on how you think you did on the test, you're going to go and advocate for your performance to potential employers. And so what happened is probably what you're expecting is going to happen. Men did a little bit better of a job self-advocating, having confidence in how they thought they did on the test. And so because they were better at self-advocating, they were more likely to be hired and have higher starting salaries. But as you can probably again imagine, who did a little better on the test? Actually, women did a little better on the test, not by a lot, but a little bit. And so the recommendations from the research were, well, maybe if we just tell women they did better, then their confidence will follow suit. And I argue in my book that actually that's not going to cut it. And that in order for women to really show up in their full confidence, representation matters. And we need to see ourselves in the rooms where decisions are made. And so it's not just about walking around telling women that they have imposter syndrome or doubt, which that is something that is valid. I know I felt those feelings. And let's also address the systemic challenges that women face at work, because that also contributes to their levels of confidence and ability to see themselves in the rooms where decisions are made. So,
yeah, it's really interesting. I'm actually reading a book at the moment, and it's talking about the different stages in life. But what it's like when it's talking about childhood, it's saying how for boys, they are kind of jockeying for position. So that's what they've always done. They're kind of trying to be the leader or the dominant person in the group. Whereas, and it's also saying that boy, and you kind of forget these things, but boys kind of tend to be friends with boys and girls tend to be friends with boys. And then what girls do is they try and collaborate a lot more, and they look for consensus within the group. And the person who rises to dominance is that person who is looking for consensus. But then you put a mix of everyone together, or as time progresses, you get to the working situation, and it's men have been doing this their entire lives, essentially, whereas women have always been that person who wants to collaborate more. And I love this concept of self-advocacy, because sometimes, and to use like a very typical American term, you might come across as being a jerk if you're seen to be advocating for yourself. And you're saying, how great am I? And how, and maybe we're not taught how to do that in a way that doesn't come across as us being really full of ourselves or overly confident or undeserving of the confidence that we have. So any thoughts to share around that?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point in that book is likely correct in many things. And what it's also done is it's established some gender norms. And so women often have a gender likability bias. Men, kind of like you said, maybe it was very normative for them to take charge, be the leader, stand up, et cetera. And when women try to exhibit those things, she is often told she is too bossy, too assertive, too aggressive. Yes. And, there is a tremendous amount of research that shows that, women still fight gender likability issues at work, because you are 100% correct. Somewhere along the way, women have the expectation for women is to, only be collaborative, only get consensus, don't speak up too much, don't get too pushy. And I think at the other end of the spectrum, I have a lot of clients who actually really embody that. And they've been told that they're too sensitive, they're too emotional, even though I saw this on a meme once, men have successfully rebranded anger as not an emotion. So, really there's a kind of a double standard there that I think that a lot of women are fighting at work, but I think there's hope, because there's a new study that came out where researchers were looking at, it was like 1.23 billion words of text used in corporate documents, et cetera, from companies that were run by women or had senior women in leadership. And what they found is that when people see more women in senior leadership, the likability that's associated with like being assertive or aggressive or direct continues to be positive. Like, more people start to see women in that light. And so it really kind of helps some of those gender likabilities, because like I always say too, when we have gender norms, it hurts men too.
Yeah.
Because men who are on the more collaborative, sensitive, soft, consensus building side, they also pay a penalty. So this isn't just about women. This is about allowing everyone to show up in a way that feels authentic to them.
Yeah. This is exactly it. And like what occurred to me as you were talking there, and we're slightly veering off the topic of the podcast, which is great, because if you haven't listened to the full podcast episode, there is a link below in the comments for anyone tuning in. Is this idea of maybe changing the script on what it means to be a leader? So is it that it's always been men who've been in leadership, and therefore they get to say what leadership actually means, or they get to say, this is how things are done? Whereas now it's time to challenge and say, well, okay, so on the one hand, you have women who are in senior leader positions, maybe where there's a male CEO, and that there's that they have those assertive qualities, and it's okay to be that way, and it's kind of celebrating that, and it's assertive and it's not aggressive, and it's maybe educated in a way that it's done in such a way as they don't come across as being too aggressive. And then on the other hand, it's like, okay, so are there some other organizations where it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's positive to be collaborative and things like that? Maybe it's a cultural difference between organizations, but I think there's an opportunity now to change that script on what being a leader means. And it doesn't have to be the dominant and jockeying for position. It can be that collaborative, more sensitive approach, let's say more feminine qualities. And I am very aware, I just want to address this, that we're talking in kind of gender norms as opposed to addressing any differences or any kind of, we're putting a blanket, I suppose, over two different genders that exist at the exclusion of other genders as well. So I just wanted to call that out for anyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something really important, that organizations were built for men by men. I mean, let's just be honest. It really wasn't that long ago that women were mostly stayed home. I mean, in the United States, only in 1974 could women take out a loan in their own name without a male cosign. And so like,
it's
this
something
is still
similar here in Ireland,
right? Yeah. And so you brought us something really important, that we're still working to change cultures and norms of things that have been around hundreds of years. And so it's a conscious choice from leadership to say, you know what, like, we're going to do things a different way, and it's going to be really uncomfortable. And we're going to make a conscious intention, to bring more representation in our leadership. And the companies that I've seen do it really well, just start with data. Like, what's our turnover rates as it relates to, gender, people of color, who gets promoted around here? Where are there fall offs, right? Because lots of times what organizations find is at the base level, there is 50-50 representation, men and women. But then as you go up, like there's fall off rates in terms of, men getting promoted more.
Certain age groups or certain time periods in your life, that's when the fall off happens, and being able to identify those. And it's really interesting you're saying about data. The most recent podcast episode that came out was out on Friday, and that's exactly the topic that we talk about. My own background is in data and analytics, and I absolutely love it. Love helping organizations to use their data more effectively to make better people decisions. And in that podcast episode from Friday, we talked about how I think the lady who's based in the UK, only 4% of companies are actually using their people data effectively. And I'm sure it's much lower in Ireland than it is in the UK, and that's a really low number as it is. So it's really interesting that you say that. I'm a huge believer in using that and trying to identify things. I'm not sure if you're aware, Kelly, but in the UK they brought out a law about the gender pay gap. So that's looking at the overall difference in pay between men and women in an organization generally. But for real insights, you need to really break it down by the different levels and see what's going on here. And really, it should be fairly balanced across. It's not a gender equal pay issue. It's a gap in terms of there are more men earning higher salaries in the organization than there are women, because there are simply more men in those senior positions in organizations. But if anyone wants to listen to that podcast episode about there's one on gender pay gap separately, but there's also one on data which came out on Friday. You're very welcome. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you will find that. So Kelly, an opportunity now to share a little bit more about your business, about your book, before we wrap things up for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it. So a little bit more about my business. I am a women's leadership coach. I work with women one-on-one. I offer the Clarity and Confidence Women's Leadership Program. I offer that publicly, typically twice a year. It's an 8-week program to help women develop some of these skills at work that we were just talking about and learn to thrive in just the reality of the systems that we're in. But most importantly, I'm really excited about my book. A few folks have early access to it as part of a book club, and I'm excited about the things that are resonating with them. So the address for that is closingtheconfidencegap.com/book. And the pre-order links, I actually, it is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble here in the United States.com.
Yeah.
So I have seen those, become populated, but if you go to that website, closingtheconfidencegap.com /
there'll be links to all of those.
Everything's there. Perfect. And you'll learn more about me. And let's just connect on LinkedIn. I always love to hear what your reflections are just on the things that we talked about. So thank you.
Brilliant. Absolute pleasure to chat to you again, Kelly. Hopefully we can continue this conversation further down the line as well. Thank you so much for your time on the podcast, and thanks again for your time today.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.